Good to see you this morning. They just put all kinds of things on this morning to make me cry, so I'm going to kind of be a mess. It's not really that kind of a message this morning, but my goodness, like that song, Bryn, like, oh my gosh. Here's what happened to me this morning. This doesn't have anything to do with my message, but maybe I'll tie it together. Like, I'm a minister, so when we sing that song, I'm singing it over you. But this morning, I kind of felt it for myself. So thank you. So imagine being a dad and your son is singing that song over you. That's kind of crazy. Thank you guys for what you do for us. The worship team, you guys are awesome. Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to get it together, I promise. I'll make excuses because that's what we're talking about this morning. But anyway, so we're starting a new series. Did y'all enjoy Bill's lasso? I don't know if he did any lasso tricks, but I mean, he had some great pointers on discipleship and how that relates to making a lasso, a cowboy's rope. So, but this morning we're starting a new series that's originally by one of my heroes, Andy Stanley. And we usually do that in the summer. We'll pick a couple of his series and work on and make it our own. And so today we're starting this series called Paper Walls. And the tagline is moving beyond the excuses that hold you back. So doesn't that sound like a lot of fun to talk about? And it really is going to be fun by the end of this series. We got 4 parts, so today's going to leave you with a little bit of angst, and that's okay, right? Because following Jesus can be hard. Sometimes we're actually going to talk about that in a minute. But anyway, so our excuses. And you're thinking right now, well, I don't have any excuses. I don't make excuses. But we'll dig in a little bit to where I can convince you that you make excuses, okay? I'm a good preacher. I'm a good communicator. You're gonna buy into it by the end of this, and they're not going to be condemned. How does that sound? That's my promise, okay? So there are things in life, you know, that as we move through life is like a journey, like you're traveling. And along the way, there are things you pick up that you should take with you along the journey from season to season and so forth. But then there are those things that you really should leave behind. And so what we're talking about this morning is that the excuses we make, those are the things we need to just leave them behind. We need to move on and leave them in the past. But see, here's the deception happens when we tend to talk about our excuses as reasons, right? Like I'm preaching in the mirror, just so you know, this morning. Like this has been hard for me to confront my own reasons, which are really excuses. See, there's a reason that I can no longer run a full flight of high hurdles. Like there's a reason, there's a good reason there's a reason I can't still run the 40-yard dash. There's a reason that when I wake up in the morning, I've got some more aches and pains than I used to have, right? There's a reason that my eyesight continues to go downhill, and it's not just because I'm getting older, it's because my brother hit me with a yardstick when I was 10. Yeah, you should feel sorry for me. But those are reasons. So there are legitimate reasons for certain things in my life, but then there are those things in my life that honestly are just excuses. And those excuses, or those reasons as we call them, eventually become becauses. And I know it's bad grammar, but just stick with me. Because it's how we answer the question. And sometimes the questions that we're asking ourselves, well, why did you do that? Well, because. Sound familiar? Why didn't you do that? Because. Fill in the blank. Why did you stay in that relationship when it was no good for you? Because. Why did you leave when you should have stayed? Because. Why didn't you start what you said you wanted to start? Because of the wonderful. No, sorry. You see what, like y'all with me this morning? You know what I'm talking about, and so reasons become becauses in how we answer the questions for why we did or didn't do something or what have you. So there's a fine line between reason and an excuse.
And one will try to masquerade as the other. An excuse will try to masquerade as a legitimate reason. But have you ever noticed that we're really good at spotting that in other people? Like, boy, I can call you on your excuses so fast. I mean, I'm a compassionate guy most of the time. At least 60% of the time, right? Yeah. But when I hear your excuses, like I know it, I see it. And you would do the same with me if I'm making excuses, then you see right through it, because usually I'd over-talk and I over-explain myself, right? Anybody else have, tics or ways you do things that it's like so easy to call yourself out, but we don't call ourselves out. We recognize in other people, hey, parents, you recognize excuses in your children, don't you? Yeah, you recognize it in your friends, or you recognize it even, kids get really smart. Have y'all noticed that? Like, now they're not real smart in middle school, but I mean, they get smarter after that, right? And they start seeing your excuses, the parents' excuses, and they're like, oh, I always thought there was a legitimate reason for that. Now I'm seeing it's just an excuse, right? And y'all with me, you young people, on your parents? Yeah. It's easy. We say things to other people, well, you're just making excuses. Look at your neighbor and say, you're just making excuses. Now be nice. No fights allowed. Yeah, we can see that in everybody. But ourselves, and this series is making me really look in the mirror and dig deep. And what I've realized is because I communicate for a living, I convince people for a living, like that's what I do. And I realized, man, I'm pretty good at dressing up excuses to look like reasons. Sometimes it's things I don't want to do, and I'll dress it up to sound like I got a really good reason why I shouldn't have to do that, right? I just don't want to, or worse, admitting all my faults this morning so you don't feel so bad. Sometimes it's because I'm afraid to do something. Yeah. And have you ever noticed when you're trying to convince somebody or something, sometimes you're really working overtime to support your quote unquote reasons? You ever notice this, that Google is your friend when it comes to supporting your excuses? Because there's no limit. And you probably, you come back and it's like, well, so-and-so who just happens to be an expert on the topic says such and such. So that's my reason, when all along it's really still just an excuse. See, excuses almost caused me to miss out on a really great experience a few years ago. Seth was young. Seth was about 8 years old, and so he played t-ball and played baseball up until he got to high school, and he was really pretty good in baseball. So we were always involved in baseball during the summer. And his machine pitch team, he had been on his first year machine pitch, had been a pretty good team, had a good squad and a good coach, and the coach and his son were moving up to the next level for the next season, and he started talking to me about being the coach of that team next year. And here's the thing. Baseball and I have a history. And it's not good. Okay, so I told you I was hit with a yardstick at 10 years old. So it totally messed up the vision in my right eye. And that's why I'm always winking at you and stuff like that. I'm always trying to make the vision better. And it's just not good. Well, have you ever tried to track a baseball, like a fastball, to hit it with one eye? It messes your depth perception up. So, I played Little League when I was a kid, but I was that kid who sat the bench the whole game until you finally got to the end where the coach was like, oh, crap, the rules of the league say I have to put Scotty in. So I'm going to stick him out in left field and hope that nobody hits the ball to him because he can't catch it either. I mean, I was pretty good at running the bases because I was fast, but I could never get on base. So I didn't play baseball very long, as you can imagine. So when that started coming up, I mean, it was like, woo, the reasons started flowing for why I shouldn't be the one to coach Seth's machine pitch baseball team. Kind of like, well, just baseball's not really my thing. You ever said anything like that? Well, I mean, it wasn't my thing, but it was my son's thing. Or, I don't know enough. Okay, let me ask you a question. How much do you have to know to coach machine pitch, right? I don't have the time. And that's just a bold-faced lie. I had plenty of time. And here's my favorite excuse. Coaching my son puts too much stress on our relationship. Right? Only if I'm too hard on him because, you know, the coach's son has to be the best on the team, right? I mean, you don't dare have a son that you coach his team that he's not the best player. And so, again, it was just an excuse. Somehow, by a miracle of God, literally, I agreed. I agreed, and here's what I told myself. Like, y'all, you're going to love that. I was in ministry still at the time, and I convinced myself, oh, Scotty, this is a great ministry opportunity. You know there's going to be lots of unchurched people on this baseball team. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. I work in a church, so I'm surrounded by church people all the time. This will get me out, you know, let me be amongst the normal people. That's literally how I convinced myself to do this, and so I agreed, and so we started the season 0-3. It was exciting. And then we didn't lose a game. Like 10 or 11 games straight. We won every game until we played in the state tournament. And it was one of the most incredible experiences that we have ever had as a family, and for me and Seth to have together. Like, it was just so much fun. I mean, we had a great time. We won a lot, so that it's always fun to win. But I almost didn't do it. Had I just been a parent sitting in the bleachers knowing that I could have coached that team and that had happened, like, do you know how disappointed in myself I would have been? Had my excuses won out, I would have totally missed that experience. And so it makes me wonder. I wonder how much I have missed out on when excuses won me over. You know, you ever stop and just think about that? That if we let excuses have their way in our lives about anything that we feel like we should or do, or God's calling us to do, or something like that, then man, we stand to miss out on so much good in our life if we continue to let our excuses pass as reasons. Okay, so there's a book in the Bible that we don't know exactly who wrote it, the book of Hebrews. Some people say it was Paul, but it doesn't seem to be Paul. But the book of Hebrews addresses this issue. And so that book is particular. It's a letter, obviously, written to Jewish Christians. Okay, so they've become followers of Jesus, but they were Jewish heritage. And so they had this whole history of the Jewish history from, you know, Moses and the children of Israel coming out of Egypt, and all the incredible stories that we read in the Old Testament that you're like, wow, these people did pretty amazing things in the face of crazy hardships, right? Like the things Moses did and David and all these people who we would call heroes of the faith. The writer of Hebrews describes a bunch of those people in chapter 11. And talks about how incredible they were. And then he gets to the no-name people that he doesn't name their names, and talks about how they overcame incredible persecution and all these things in order to still be faithful to follow God and to be obedient to God. And then he gets to chapter 12 and he's set it up like this in 12 verse 1. With all these stories and their heritage in the background that he just, you know, talked about so much. He says, therefore, in light of this history that we have, in light of our heritage that we have, the fathers and mothers of our faith, in light of all of that, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Here's what he's getting ready to basically say in other words, nicer words probably than I have. He's saying, when it comes to being faithful to God, to Jesus, particularly for them, he says, looking back at what these people were able to accomplish and do and to be faithful through, there are no excuses not to be. See, a life of faith requires hard things. It sounds silly for me to just say that out loud because it's like, well, of course it does. I mean, who expects that you're going to walk the walk of faith and not have hard things? But sometimes we just need to be reminded of that if you want to be faithful, just because something's hard doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Just because something's scary doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. Just because something's just beyond your skill set, you might have to stretch and grow a little bit. Remember our message on knowing your limits, okay? You keep that in mind too. But then there's also times when God calls us to break through those limits. When he does, there's no excuses. And that's what this writer of Hebrews is saying. He says, in light of that, think of the language, like picture this. Let us throw off. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Like, have you ever noticed that like you don't have to work at sinning? You don't have to, and by that it can be simply just saying no to God. Like giving God your reasons or excuses, if we're being honest. It's so easy, like sin will overtake that way if we disobey God or don't follow God or refuse to move forward when he's calling us forward. It says, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Things like, okay, don't go looking for someone to agree with you about your reasons, right? Y'all ever do that? Like build a case? And the funny thing is, we can laugh at ourselves today, is it okay? The funny thing is who are we building a case for? It's to convince ourselves, isn't it? That's kind of the ironic thing in this topic, is that the person we make excuses to, for the most part, is ourselves. At least I know it's true for me. I don't know, is it true for you? Yeah, it's like I can convince myself of just about anything. So throw off everything. Don't let it tie you up. Don't let it hold you down and hold you back. Because he says this, he's talking about the life of faith, let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. And when I got to that part, I'm like, God, I really hate that word. There are words I like grace. It's just a pretty word, isn't it? That's why people pick it as a name for their daughters, like grace. It's so nice to say because you can smile, but perseverance, you got to furrow your brow. It's man up, boy, get ready to persevere. Oh, why does that have to be in the Bible so much? Have you noticed how many times, especially the New Testament authors like Paul and those guys, talk about perseverance? Come on. Can't we talk about something more fun, a sexier word, something? Come on. And he's like, no. Run that race that is your life, that's marked out for you by God, by the hand of God, the sovereignty of God. He's put things in front of you to accomplish and to do and to fulfill in his grand scheme of things. He wants you to do your part. But you're going to have to persevere because the life of faith requires some hard things. And then, see, here's what the author does. Then the author gives us the secret. We're still on verse 1, okay? Hang with me, yeah? He says this, and this really is the key. Fixing our eyes on Jesus. He would say, yes, you're going to have to face some hardships. You're going to have to face some of your fears. Like me, fear of failure just paralyzes me sometimes. If you want to run your race, the one God has marked out for you, you're going to have to persevere and get through some of those hard things. And the way you do it, he would say, is keep your eyes on Jesus. And doesn't that sound like preacher speak? But he's saying, no, don't lose sight of what this is about. Keep your eyes, fix your eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Then he says, for the joy, so that's a good word, right? For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. It's almost like, really you want to make excuses? Like we're going to talk about it in another part, but bring your excuses to Jesus and imagine how he would respond. We're going to look at some examples of people who made excuses to Jesus. And you would think he would respond real nicely, but he doesn't. It's like, remember Jesus, keep your eyes fixed on him, the one who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. You know why Jesus sat down? Because he finished. He finished. He set the example for us that finishing the race, finishing the purpose that God has marked out for us. He's saying he is the example. Fix your eyes on him. It's not all hardship. I hope you know that. I mean, following Jesus can be really fun sometimes. There are hard things, but it's not all hard times. Sometimes you're going to have to push through. Sometimes you're going to have to endure, persevere. And that's even harder in today's world, isn't it? Well, for me, we became so accustomed to canceling everything. Hear people talk about cancel culture. And there was good reason behind a lot of that for public safety and such. But man, I don't know if y'all still struggle, but I still struggle. Because when I come up against something hard, it's just easy to find an excuse to cancel and go, yeah, well, we can't do that this time. Like, am I the only one? But it's just so easy to just cancel it as not important or too hard or too uncomfortable or too risky. I hope that doesn't continue in our society and our culture, especially in our church culture, that we get back on track and learn to confront and do the hard things that God will at times call us to do. He goes on about Jesus. Consider him. In other words, keep your mind on him. Keep your thoughts on him. When you're facing something hard, consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Saying, keep your mind, your eyes, yes, your focus on him. And when you're faced with something hard, remember him. Remember what he has already done for you and the great lengths that he has gone to rescue you, to give you freedom from the sin that wants to tangle you up and hold you back. Consider him when you're faced with something hard, because he has been there. And it's not like you got to compare your suffering to Jesus. That's not his point. His point is that he's the pioneer. He's broken through the things that were impossible for us to break through. He's already broken through those things for us. So see, Jesus is not just our example. He is our example, but he's not just our example. He makes our journey possible. That's grace, right? That's the power of God through Jesus working in us to fulfill what we can't do on our own. Are you glad that when you're faced with those things, you're like, oh my God, that's going to take perseverance? Are you glad that you can look to Jesus and go, if I'll just commit, if I'll just go in, if I'll just jump, his grace will meet me there. And his grace will do what I can't do on my own. So I can do this. Look at your neighbor and say, you can do it. You can do it. You can do the hard things. See, I want leave you with a couple of pointers about this, suggestions, if you would. We're going to be early today. That never happens with me, does it? Yeah. When you're faced with a decision like that where it's a hard thing that you're trying to, you kind of know you're supposed to do it, but you really don't want to, and those excuses start flowing, right, easily. Ask yourself, okay, is this a real reason or just an excuse? Because the thing is, the way we have to start with dealing with our tendency to do this is we have to get brutally honest with ourselves. Because that's what we talked about in the beginning. It's like we can convince ourselves. I mean, the Bible says pretty clearly, like it's in the top 10. You know what I'm talking about? The 10 Commandments. Don't lie, basically. I'm paraphrasing. Like even when we lie to ourselves, and it's the worst kind of lie, isn't it? When we lie to ourselves. So we got to start with asking ourselves the hard question and getting real with ourselves. Is it a real reason or is it just an excuse? And dig into it. Get honest with yourself. You're not committing to do anything differently. I'm just saying you just owe it to yourself to be completely honest with yourself. Say what's actually true when you ask yourself that question. And it might be this, honestly, I'm too scared. And what? Okay. At least you know. At least you've been honest with yourself and admitted to yourself, I'm too scared. Right? And that might be middle school boys wanting to ask a girl to dance. Like how many of you, I was the boy that was way too scared. I had to wait to be asked out by the girl before I could finally get a date, right? I'm too scared. Sometimes we just need to own it. Or, I don't want to. Like sometimes there's someone asking you to do something, and we've talked about boundaries before too. Like you're in control of your life. You should be in control of your life. That's what self-control, the fruit of the Spirit, is all about. When they're asking you to do something, you start feeling obligated and you want to come up with excuses. Why not just be honest and say, no, I don't want to do that? Like, why is that so hard? Have y'all noticed how hard that is to just be honest and say the truth? And sometimes we need to say it to ourselves. Yeah, I'm not going to make an excuse. I'm just going to be honest with myself. You know what? I don't want to do this. I don't want to do the dishes. I don't want to do the laundry. I don't want to clean the pool again after another rainstorm, right? I don't want to. Just be honest. Or, this is a good one. It's not important to me. And sometimes owning that is the first step to value shifting. I want to follow Jesus. I kind of want to follow Jesus, but it's just not been that important to me. And at least you know the truth, and then you can deal with it, because you can't deal with a lie or an excuse. Or, here's my favorite one, because it's one I really don't like to admit, because I'm a man. We raised 2 boys, we've been through some hard stuff, and life has not been easy for me, but sometimes I just got to admit that it's too hard. That's why I want to make excuses, is that it's too hard. If you do this, and you start to get honest with yourself and answer these questions in all honesty when you're tending to make excuses, here's what it'll do. It'll frustrate you. It'll frustrate you with yourself. And you know what? That's okay. Because sometimes we need to be frustrated with ourselves that we just don't want to. Or frustrated with ourselves that it's just not important enough to me. Because here's what's at stake. You don't want to miss out. You don't want to miss out on the life that God has laid out for you, because I can promise you this, I don't know your future, but I know God has an incredible life for you. And excuses for you, just like for me, will keep you from getting to its fullness. And the truth about life is that life is hard, whether you follow Jesus or not. I don't know if you noticed that. Like I remember, I started following Jesus seriously at 17, and life was just as hard before it as it was after it, maybe a little harder. So life's going to be hard one way or the other. Why not make it worth it and follow Jesus in the hard that he calls you into? And before I let you go, I'm just going to tell you how serious I am about this. Like literally just this morning, I shared a few weeks ago the struggle that I was having about options of graduate school. I'm a seminary dropout like 3 times. I finished every class I started. I'm not that bad of a dropout, but I've not finished my degree. And so I've been wrestling and trying to find all these options, and I've narrowed it down to what I should do. And I haven't even applied yet for the fall. Like, application deadlines are going to be in July. It's not that bad. It's Howard Payne. It's so convenient. It's right here. It's not super expensive. I know all kinds of people. They're begging me to come. And I've not even applied. And so here's what I did for you this morning. No, it was really for me. I sat down with my journal and I asked myself, why have you not taken the first step? And I got honest with myself. And I started admitting some things. Like, I'm not intimidated by theological studies. I'm not. Like, you can't intimidate me with the Bible. I've spent so much time reading and studying on my own outside the classroom that you can't intimidate me with the topic. So it's got to be something else. I'm fine with discussion, classroom discussion, and that kind of thing. You know what scares me, though? What I got honest with myself is like, I am so scared of writing papers, research papers that have to be done a certain way. Like, that scares me. I come from an uneducated family where hard academic things were extra hard. They're still extra hard for me because that's just how I grew up. But is it a reason not to apply? The other thing was like, I'm about to turn 49 this month, in a few weeks. I don't want to be that old guy in class. Like, for real. I always view myself as a young person. And now I got this gray beard and, winking all the time because I'm trying to fix my eyesight. And it's like, what are these young, because I know there's a lot of young people that got straight into that master's program and like, I'm going to be the old guy. The one who talks too much, the one who already knows it all, has already figured it all out. Like, I don't want to be that guy, but I don't know how to not be that guy either. And I still haven't applied. I didn't have time this morning. Bill's going to have a great time with this message when he watches it. But at least I know. Like, I at least feel better. Okay, I got that out to myself, and now you guys know. Like, it's all public. It's like, there's no more excuses, Scotty. Either do it or just say, I'm not going to do this. And I'm not ready to say that yet. Because I think that is something that God wants me to do. And if I let the excuses win out, I'll miss out on something that God has in store for me. And I don't even really know what that is. But if it's what God has me, it's got to be good. So don't let your excuses win out. Get honest with yourself. That's the first step. We'll go to part 2 next week. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you that you make no room for excuses, Lord, that you graciously and mercifully confront us with them. Lord, help us be honest with ourselves. Show us our own hearts and what's really there. And Lord, the fears and the anxieties and the things that are there, God, just like you do as the perfect Father, reassure our hearts that if we will trust you and follow Jesus, you will work it out for us. We're so grateful that you do that for us. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you guys for being here. I love you. I appreciate you. Come back next week for part 2 of Paper Walls.